So here we go with our next document. The next document we're required to understand and be able to use for our exams are the some of the Federalist papers, and the Anti-Federalist papers. We'll start with Federalist 10. Federalist 10 was also studied in our first unit on constitutional origins. And I have some key ideas here on the right that will help us understand what the key components of the document are, how it relates to the concepts of participatory versus pluralist versus elitist democracies, and what factions are and how they play a role in this particular document. So it is a Federalist paper, historically speaking. The Federalist papers were written by James Madison, Alexander Hamilton, and John Jay. This one written by James Madison, trying to convince, in particular, the state of New York to ratify the Constitution. And there were a lot of people who were opposed to the Constitution. They thought it was very dangerous and it wouldn't create an effective government. Federalist papers to try to counteract those arguments. So Madison talks a lot about the idea of factions in Federalist 10. We've read this document, so you want to go back to the text of it itself. But a faction, generally speaking, is a group of people who are aligned for a common purpose. They, in the modern sense, would be an interest group, a group of people who are trying to get a certain policy proposal through our political system. The concern that some people have when it comes to democracy, and that people had at the time of the debate over the ratification of the Constitution, was that factions were very dangerous in a democratic system, and one faction could overrule the rights of minority groups, and minority factions could be overwhelmed. Not all voices would be able to be heard, and this could lead to tyranny. So Madison argues that you can't get rid of factions, but you can control factions. So that's the key in Federalist 10, is that the mischiefs of factions, the bad things that factions can do, taking away rights from people, they can be controlled by the political system that the Constitution set up. So people will argue that, and Madison argues, that a pure participatory democracy it's not going to work. It doesn't solve factions. So if everybody is voting on everything and political participation is entirely complete, then this doesn't solve the mischiefs of factions. In this case, overwhelming majorities of people could impose their will on others. So Madison argues for a large republic. This is really, really important. He says this is at the core of the U.S. the Constitution that is created. It actually creates a system where factions will not be able to take complete control. No one single faction, because so many different groups are represented, will be able to overwhelm all of the other factions. The country will be big enough that it will prevent that from occurring. So that's one of the things he really, really pushes on, is that we need a large republic. And as it relates to pluralism and elitism, Madison, you could say he kind of argues for elements of both in this particular document. He says that we're going to have a society that is pluralist. We're going to have the best features of a pluralist system. More people, more groups of people are going to be involved in our large republic. Different views are going to be represented from across the country, and this is inherently good, and the best ideas will be brought forward. He also has an element of an elitist argument. He basically is saying that because we have a large republic, we'll be able to choose the best representatives, the smartest people to help govern that republic. And sometimes the elites, they actually know better than the people themselves what's best. And so Madison, he says, we're not going to have a participatory democracy. It doesn't work, but a pluralist democracy could work, and elitist elements of that could also work. Large republic, that's what we want. It eliminates the mischiefs of factions. On the flip side of this, we have Brutus 1. So Brutus 1 is an anti-Federalist paper, or a series of counter-arguments that are made to the Federalist papers during the debates over the ratification of the Constitution. And in this particular paper, you can kind of go point by point when it comes to what Madison said in Federalist 10 and comparing it to Brutus 1. So Brutus 1, the argument is going to be that large republics they're way too large, they're way too unwieldy, it's way too impractical to govern a country in a democratic, republican way. that's this big. It just can't work. And so there's a real concern about having a strong centralized Republican government for such a wide, vast territory. There's concern that this would be way too pluralistic. There would be different groups pushing against one another so much that the system would become bogged down and no decisions would be able to be made, and it would become very inefficient and ineffective. And there's also a concern that in this ineffective and inefficient system, a elite group could take control or could take advantage of the situation. And then eventually that could lead to a tyrannical government where people are saying, well, the pluralist system isn't working, so we got to follow these few people or this individual who's trying to take charge of the chaos. So, although Brutus, one, doesn't explicitly say we want a participatory democracy, he's implying that smaller governments, more participatory elements, that's going to be a much more effective system. So you see a real contrast between Federalist 10 and Brutus 1. It's really important you understand these documents and understand how they go together, or really are flip sides of the same coin when it comes to what the pros and cons were that were being argued after the Constitution was written at the Constitutional Convention and when the states were debating whether or not they should ratify it. So those are our two documents, Federalist 10 and Brutus 1.